Hello, my name is Calvin from Defund the BBC. Today, I'm privileged to be joined by Richard Tice, businessman and chairman of the Brexit Party. Richard, thank you for joining me.
Great pleasure. Nice to be with you.
So Richard, you are the chairman of the Brexit Party. It's still a party. You are also an MEP of the Brexit Party. You're a candidate in the last general election for the Brexit Party.
Right.
So you've been invited onto the BBC quite a lot. Has their treatment of you altered your perception of how the BBC operates?
I mean, in terms of day to day, it's very professional. They're very courteous, and I've actually rarely had anything to grumble about in terms of the day to day operational treatment. And of course, both sides will argue that they're a bit biased one way or the other. I think it's not so much that; it's about the overall concept of, for me, forcing people in today's world to pay a fixed amount for a series of services that frankly many people no longer want. And it just feels in today's world, when there's so much competition, you can get effectively almost all of what the BBC offers from other people. That's how competition works. And I think that's why there needs to be a proper reassessment, and that's why we at the Brexit Party, one of our policies was to have a complete relook at the whole BBC licence fee structure.
So, as the chairman of the party, you've supported Defund the BBC, so thank you for that. But is that official party policy? Is what I was going to ask.
Yeah, our party policy, and it was what we talked about in our contract with the people last year is and obviously there's different ways of restructuring things with the BBC, and we felt that there needs to be a proper national conversation and a major restructure. That's I think where and it's right to have that debate, and let's have it as a proper national conversation, because I think lots of people have got different views on it, many of which are incredibly valid. But I'm not aware that the nation's ever been able to have some form of say, whether it's through a series of assemblies, whether it's through a referendum. There's a variety of ways we could have that conversation, but and arrive at a different solution. But for us, the current model fundamentally is no longer, frankly, it's no longer valid, it's no longer relevant, it's no longer appropriate, and it needs changing, and it needs major reform.
And you mentioned the national conversations there. So obviously Lawrence Fox has just recently launched his Reclaim Party, and he's been very outspoken about the BBC and their obsession, with woke metropolitan views. Where does the Brexit Party stand on these issues? Is the Brexit Party going to make a comeback to take more of an active role in these cultural conversations?
So we are looking at the political landscape as we speak very closely. Obviously, initially we were a party that set up with one specific mission, and essentially we achieved that. We were like special forces coming out from the base. We had a mission, we succeeded, mission accomplished, back to base, retrain, watch what's happening. And we always said this year was about watching the government, holding them to account on this particular issue. And in fairness to the government on Brexit, so far, we're getting near the end, but so far they've been rock solid. Let's see what happens. We are making it very clear, we're watching them very closely. We're staying very alert, and urging people to beware of a sellout. So in a sense, that's our current core focus. But that will be resolved pretty imminently, and there are some big issues, and the issues of the culture wars. Nigel and I were very outspoken in the summer about our concerns about how the Mayor of London was essentially sort of caving in to the protests, allowing statues and war memorials to be defaced with no comeback whatsoever. And we made it very clear that was completely unacceptable, and only belatedly, because of the pressure that the likes of Lawrence and ourselves and others put on, it did actually the government start to, sort of belatedly say something against this. And then, there was a recognition that the police, who, we all admire and respect, but if they haven't got the right leadership, the right guidance, then they get these things wrong. And on that occasion, without that leadership and guidance, or the wrong guidance, they got it badly wrong. And that was the trigger for it. And then, there are numerous issues of wokeness. I describe them as sort of the woke warriors, who do in certain areas appear to be almost taking over. And, that is completely, it's just not acceptable. So yeah, we're very exercised about it. And it's a case of what is the right way, and, what's the right way of trying to take it on, to highlight the concerns. The truth is, if you go around any pub or club, cafe, across England, across the regions and towns, villages, most people won't know what the word woke means. And when we have that conversation, sort of the undercurrent of what is really going on. So look, it's important. It's a case of saying, what's the right way of taking them on and trying to shape and influence events. That's what it's all about. Politics is about shaping and influencing. And for us, given where we are in the electoral cycle, we've got to work out what's the best way that we can shape and influence.
I think you've been great at that. You and Nigel, and Lawrence is doing good stuff in that area in the moment as well. Applying pressure, keeping the Tories honest, that kind of stuff. And I see whenever you do something, there is always a reaction from the government. So it's very important that you maintain that. But do you think there is a space for a new party in UK politics? What are the pitfalls that you learned with the Brexit Party when it comes to being the new kid on the block in our political system?
Fortunately, we had the wisdom and experience of Nigel. There's no one in British politics who's got more experience of campaigning, of strategy, and the pitfalls. And there are many. I mean, there's a reason why basically new political parties don't really emerge. It's incredibly difficult. The pitfalls are huge. You've got to raise big amounts of money. First past the post is brutal on new parties. Look at the Liberal Democrats and how tough it is for them. And look how tough it was for us in the general election. Under proportional representation, May 19, we smashed it. We essentially won the whole election. And that was because we captured a mood and we were a new party. And I suspect that's never happened before. But under first past the post, it's really, really difficult. And that's one of the reasons why, we'd like to see more proportional representation. You've obviously got it under the Scottish elections, the Welsh elections, the mayoral elections. And that's more appropriate. And it allows people, whether it's Lawrence, whether it's us, whether it's others, who've got a particular issue, so that we can, you can actually propose something to the population, to voters, and you can engage a mood. And we constantly hear it. There's an appetite for new parties, but it's difficult. It's not to be underestimated by anybody. And talk is cheap, but action is really hard in that sense.
Yeah. On that note, you mentioned you've spoken to a lot of ordinary people across the country, in pubs and just regular folks who not only as part of your role campaigning for the Brexit Party, but also, of course, you were a co-founder of Leave Means Leave. So why is there such a huge divide between the general public and what they're thinking and what we're being fed by our national broadcaster?
Because the national broadcaster doesn't do what I've done. It doesn't go and sit in the pubs with people out in the countryside and out in the regions and the towns and villages, and listen, to good ordinary citizens, going about their daily lives. The vast majority of the senior management and the senior presenters in the BBC are part of the metropolitan London elite, living in a very concentrated area. Essentially, they're an echo chamber. But it's actually worse than that, as I understand. When you talk to people who have worked at the BBC, who've seen how it operates, the reality is, for example, the very recruitment process, they will recruit their own. They're not going to recruit people with a different political point of view. And that just becomes completely embedded in the culture. People with a different point of view are terrified. If you were a Brexiteer working for the BBC before Brexit became a big issue back in whenever it was, 12, 13, 14, you'd be petrified to mention your view for fear of basically being put into Coventry. Yeah. It's really bad, really, really bad. And so it's not just, you've got the issue of their sort of metropolitan cultural political bias, but then there's also the question about the huge financial waste, which I think winds people up just as much, actually.
Absolutely. We'll come back to the finances in a second, because I want to elaborate on what you touched on there, because you also spoke out about the last night of the proms and the whole scandal back in August, and how the BBC seems to be going out of its way to cancel British traditions and British culture and reframing our history. Do you think this is part of a wider movement, or is this something that's very much led by a small clique in the media?
I think it's a clique in the media and what I call the metropolitan London elite. And those who actually don't believe really in the sovereign nation state. And of course, it actually does come back to the cultural, philosophical divide of some on the Remain side, I repeat, some, who, they believe they are citizens of the EU. They don't share, which I find quite extraordinary. They don't seem to share the pride in the UK, in Great Britain. They don't share the joy that we do from our heritage, from our achievements, from our successes, which have been numerous. All they do is focus on, in a sort of the global elite, or they focus on areas where, we've learned lessons, where of course every nation makes mistakes in its history. And of course there are issues that when you apply today's values, you look back a couple of 100 years and you say, how on earth was that, how did that happen? But the truth is, back then, values were different, perceptions were different. But we should take pride. I mean, you take the whole issue of slavery, for instance. Let's take huge pride from the fact that it was Britain that basically started to abolish slavery. And it was hard. And the battles then, the sort of domestic debating battles, was probably a bigger issue as Brexit was. But ultimately, the likes of Wilberforce won the day. And then the Royal Navy, they actually patrolled the seas, and they helped bear down on the slave trade from other nations. So we were literally, we were a leader in stopping slavery, and we should be incredibly proud of that. Rather than sort of trying to whip and chastise and beat ourselves up. No. Actually, exactly the opposite. We spotted that this was wrong. As a nation, we came to terms with that. We changed it, and then we led the way.
So refreshing, Richard. Honestly, we do have things in our history we can learn from, but absolutely, there's so many things we should be celebrating, our successes and the progress we've made. And I don't feel like the BBC does that at all. So move back to the finances that you raised a minute ago. We've spoken out against the huge salaries from some of the stars at the BBC, and I know you've mirrored this as well, and how it doesn't sit well with them that are now being chased. The over 75s, the elderly are being chased for the license fee. The BBC went back on their deal with the government for free license fees for over 75s in just under 2 years. How does this balance out? How can there be massive pay rises for millionaires while chasing the elderly at the same time?
It's what happens when an organisation has no need to perform, no accountability, and feel that they've got a bottomless pit of money. And when they need a bit more, they basically write to the government and they negotiate, rather than having actually, the real power of raw competition. And so the waste in the BBC is utterly legendary. Whether it's simple things like at a sporting event, the number of people they will send, in terms of production and technical and cameras, it's way more than other broadcasters will send. And so it goes on. And then you look at the salaries, and they are bluntly ludicrous. We talk about competition, and the BBC will trot out that, oh, we need to pay big salaries to the likes of Gary Lineker in order to compete. There is absolutely no way that the likes of Sky would be paying Gary Lineker £1.75 million a year. It's just not going to happen. There's no way, frankly, anybody else would pay the lovely Zoe Ball £1.3 or £4 million a year. It's just ludicrous. Everybody can see that. So,
especially when she's losing listeners.
Yeah, and that's about performance. I think those are just a couple of high-profile examples. But, my experience in decades of running businesses, small, medium, and large, and looking at other businesses, when you spot a chunk of waste in a particular area, actually it becomes endemic. It runs through the whole organisation. When you walk into an office building of a big firm and it's full of Ritz and glitz and marble and, there's all sorts of freebies on the coffee table, and you think there's a lot of very smartly dressed people milling around, you think, this smells to me rather wasteful. And that probably then, runs through the whole organisation. And that's the case at the BBC.
Probably a top-down thing, isn't it? I mean, Tony Hall was a shambles of a director general. He didn't quite grasp the mood of the nation, both in terms of Brexit and the culture wars. Do you think the new DG, Tim Davie, has a better understanding of what's going on? Is it too late to fix it? So the two questions are, is the rot at the BBC set too deep? And do you think Charles Moore, as the chairman, could make a difference?
The rot is set too deep. I think it would take too long, too much of an overhaul. I think, sometimes actually, basically, you've got to cut the cancer out. And there is a cancer in the BBC in terms of both its culture and in terms of its financial waste. A notice period of 3 or 4 years where you say, actually, after that, the whole deal changes and much of what you do is going to have to be on a subscription service basis. And look, the BBC does some fantastic programmes, and long may that continue. And so, of course, they can take on all the other channels and the different services and thrive in it. And I think we'd all celebrate if actually they did that and they were the best at it. I would be the first to applaud them. And if they provided great subscription value and great programmes, I would be, without question, subscribe. And you could have a debate about whether or not the news, should the news channel specifically, should that be should there be some form of different arrangement for that? Happy to have that debate. I think the thing about, if you were to say, well, the BBC should be the sort of the core basis of unbiased reporting of news, I'm happy to have that discussion and debate, as long as there's proper, accountable editorial control over it, as opposed to what we've got at the moment. And there's a variety of ways of doing that. So I think that's all part of it's like a big jigsaw, and you could or a big cake, and you could cut it up in numerous ways. But I think the fundamental point is the vast majority of it needs to be opened up to competition. And I think as a result, taxpayers would end up saving money. Actually, the quality of what they do would probably go up. The waste would go down. It's a massive, I normally often talk about a win-win. I think that's a win-win-win.
So I think you've answered some of this, but to wrap up, the two kind of final questions are, what do you think the BBC's biggest problem is, and do you think they have a future?
I'll answer the second part first. Yes, I do think they have a future, but I think it should be at a different, with a different financial structure. And I think that would, trigger huge benefits. So yes, it's definitely got a future. My biggest anxiety about it at the moment, actually, because I'm from the world of business, very focused on on the money side of it. I think the financial waste, drives a lot of the issues, a lot of the problems. The very suggestion that they could spend 100 million on diversity, it just in itself is ludicrous. And as for the new Director General, of course we all wish him well. There's no question he's certainly aware of the public mood about certain issues. But is he actually going to fundamentally, proactively offer reform? I doubt it. Reform will have to be forced on the BBC. The sooner the better. It's a huge opportunity for this Conservative government. I really hope they have the courage and the space to grasp it. Time will tell.
That sounds very positive and pragmatic to me. So, Richard Tice, thank you very much for coming on Defund the BBC. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Bye.